Good morning, everyone. Every day, millions of Australians look at their plates and wonder, am I eating the right things for my health? To answer this, we look at our National Nutrition Framework. Dietary guidelines provide advice about the foods we need to eat for health and well-being. Supported by accompanied documents, this provides advice relating to our public health needs. When followed, this high-quality research helps reduce the risk of chronic conditions like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. However, while the science behind our current guidelines is incredibly thorough, critical gaps exist, leading to disconnect between the research and everyday eating habits. Today, I am presenting a proposed enhancement to our National Nutrition Framework titled From Guidelines to Understanding: Modernising Australians' Nutritional Framework for Informed Health. Future progress relies entirely on a clear perspective of the present. While our traditional framework is scientifically robust on a spreadsheet, a critical review reveals 3 key areas that prevent it from being practically executed. First is the impractical metrics. Relying on abstract weights and serving size makes real-time tracking difficult during busy routines and limits informed, healthy dietary choices. Secondly is the unfair individual burden it places. The flexibility in the guidelines offers both opportunity and limitations, leaving consumers vulnerable to deceptive marketing and app overload. It continues to ignore critical structural barriers like financial affordability, regional access, and a lack of public education on food matrix mechanics. Finally, the outdated scientific scope ignores vital emerging science, specifically failing to account for food processing levels, natural food matrix structures, and chrononutrition timing. Ultimately, because of our daily dietary choices are heavily dictated by broader socio-ecological systems rather than just individual willpower, our current guideline risk being purely aspirational rather than practically achievable. To bridge the communication gap between research and daily practice, this framework translates the science into something intuitive and practical through a surfing metaphor. Just as the surfer must manage their equipment, read changing tidal conditions, and respect the ocean's ecosystem, Australians must learn how to build balanced meals, adjust metabolic eating patterns, and navigate real-world food systems. This slide introduces the Surf Session model, a systems-based approach that simplifies complex nutrition into an interconnected visual system. Here, the surfboard deck represents the plate itself. This foundation is supported by essential behaviour elements: food pairing, hydration, timing, and accessibility. Together, these elements transform abstract rules into an intuitive, practical lifestyle. Current guidelines primarily focus on using static food groups of recommendations to decide what we eat. In contrast, the Surf Session model expands this to provide the how, when, and why the dietary selections through nutrient interactions, timing, and environmental access create a more behaviour-focused and real-world approach. This brings us to Pillar 1, Guideline 1, the 50-25-25 Whole Food Guide, conceptualised as the surfboard deck. As we established, traditional metrics lead to consumer confusion, poor nutritional timing, and hidden deficiencies. The surfboard deck aims to strip back that academic jargon, translating complex dietary science into 3 intuitive, proportional sectors. The plate or the surfboard has 50% of protective plants, so our fruit and veg, 25% of unrefined grains, and the final 25% goes to our protein. By reallocating these plate percentages to whole foods, we prioritise the natural food matrix. This messaging is critical as our bodies don't just respond to isolated nutrients, but they respond to how they're physically packaged. By keeping their nutrients in their natural structure, this acts as a physical buffer, which slows down our digestive system, stopping blood sugar spikes and prolongs fullness. It also prevents systemic inflammation triggered by processed alternatives. Crucially, this three-sector layout implements an increased, evenly distributed protein allocation, satisfying the vital 25 to 30 grams per meal threshold that's required for maximizing muscle protein synthesis and supporting active lifestyles throughout the day. Guideline 2 focuses on the board's materials. Current guidelines rely on the ambiguous term discretionary choice, prioritizing isolated nutrients which overlook the food matrix. As a result, 1/3 of highly processed supermarket products are still classified as healthy core foods, despite extensive industrial processing. Updating this framework is necessary given Australia's escalating health burden. 2/3 of adults are classified as overweight or obese, while rates of anxiety and other mental health disorders are on the rise by 33%. At the same time, ultra-processed foods contribute to 42% of total energy intake and are associated with disruptive metabolic function, poorer diet quality, and negative mental health outcomes. From a physiological standpoint, choosing whole foods rich in prebiotic plant fibers support gut health, which helps downregulate systemic inflammation and reduce cortisol stress response. In contrast, ultra-processed foods are broken down so much that they digest quickly, leading to faster stomach emptying, unstable blood sugars. Over time, this chronic inflammatory state can disrupt neurochemical signaling within dopamine pathways, contributing to the rising prevalence of anxiety, depression, and ADHD diagnosis among Australians. Food structure is also important at the nutrient level. For example, choosing whole fat diet over low-fat modified versions helps preserve the natural food matrix, as fat extracted degrades the dairy structure and alters your vitamin absorption. Systemically, these findings support embedding the NOVA classification framework into the institutional food and canteen standards. To truly fix nutrition in Australia, our public health guidelines need to move past isolated nutrients and embrace biochemical synergy. When we break natural whole food connections, we disrupt sleep patterns, trigger systemic inflammation, and significantly raise clinical risks for depression, obesity, and heart disease. We must implement systemic strategies that protect the food matrix, as backed by the landmark 2023 research by Townsend and colleagues. To achieve this, our guidelines need 3 simple, practical pairings. First, the sleep. Pair tryptophan-rich foods with complex carbs, magnesium, and vitamin B6 to create melatonin. Second, for the bones, combine calcium with vitamins D and K to boost absorption way past its low 10% baseline, steering calcium into the bones instead of the arteries. Thirdly, for energy, eat vitamin C alongside plant-based iron to completely override the dietary blockers found in daily tea, coffee, and grains. By unlocking these natural biological pathways, we can finally stop preventable nutrient deficiencies across Australia. While water is visually included in the dietary guidelines, traditional framework treated as a passive beverage rather than a dynamic metabolic driver. Consequently, most Australian adults fail to meet the baseline recommendations, directly escalating risk to poor diet quality, metabolic syndrome, and acute dehydration illness. Early stage dehydration impairs cognitive performance and working memory, a vulnerability heavily amplified in Australia's hot climate. Biochemically, just 1 to 2% drop in the total body water triggers fluid conservation, which prompts the hypothalamus to overlap thirst signal with hunger cues and driving overconsumption of energy-dense foods. Crucially, current guidelines assume universal water access, yet over 400 remote Indigenous communities lack reliable, uncontaminated water due to infrastructure flaws. Hydration is an environmental equity issue, not just an individual choice. To fix this, Australians should prioritise 1 to 2 cups of water upon waking, while schools and workplaces must mandate time-fueled intervals to safeguard public cognitive health. Now we navigate from what we eat to when we process it. Our mandate is clear: eat with your body clock. Fuel your system during daylight activities and let it recover at night. This protects your metabolism, hormones, bones, and muscles. This highlights a major structural flaw in the current guidelines, which treat energy intake as time independent, when in reality metabolic processes vary across the day. Ignoring biological timing triggers neuroendocrine failures, driving obesity, chronic neuroinflammation, and cardiovascular disease. Practically, we must sync carbohydrates with peak activity, distribute protein evenly, and enforce an even macronutrient taper that defends our sleep cycles and supports lifelong musculoskeletal longevity. Our final anchor is Guideline 6, support local and eat fresh. Previous frameworks treated dietary choice as an individual responsibility, completely overlooking the structural supply chains that dictate equity. In reality, long distribution networks create remote Australian food deserts, forcing an artificial reliance on cheap, ultra-processed alternatives. Shifting to a systems-level framework solves the policy blindset. We must mandate structured hands-on cooking programs to build food literacy against industry health washing. Practically, this requires shorter distribution networks using sustained native proteins like kangaroo, cost-effective alternatives like flash frozen peas and canned legumes, and mastering household storage to prevent food waste. This directly secures affordable, nutrient-dense whole foods while protecting both biologically and financial resilience. In summary, this modern framework transforms nutrition from a boring spreadsheet of data points into a connected, living ecosystem. By replacing rigid calorie calculations with the intuitive surf session model, we give people the real world how, when, and why of eating. True health cannot exist in isolation. Our bodies care about how foods are packaged, chemically paired, timed throughout the day, and systemically accessed. By protecting the food matrix and establishing water equity, we move past the unfair blame of personal willpower, and instead we address the real-world environments that shape our choices. This framework is a practical blueprint guaranteeing every Australian the biological support and community access needed for lifelong metabolic brain and muscle resilience. Thank you for your time.